When Taylor Jenkins was fired last year, it was a pretty controversial decision given how good the Grizzlies' record still was at the time. They had slid dramatically since the beginning of the year, and it was evident that the team was spiraling out of control. The question is whether the decision to fire Jenkins was what needed to happen, and if the reasons for that firing were actually as much tied to the fall of the team last season as most people kind of presented. What I've heard is that the front office brought in Noah LaRoche and Tuomas Asalo last year to revamp the offense, and it was needed. The half-court offense under Taylor Jenkins had been mediocre at best, terrible at worst. You can't win playoff games with transition. You can't win playoff games just getting downhill with your athleticism. Everyone's strong, everyone's fast, everyone's disciplined. So they needed to revamp the offense, and that makes sense. So they brought in Asalo and LaRoche and eventually gave LaRoche the reins of the offense. LaRoche, you'll know, is now in Miami, where his fast-paced style is helping the Heat out to a great start to the season, even though they're without Tyler Hero and have been without Bam Adebayo for the last several games. Now, the offense in Miami actually isn't why. They're wearing out teams. This is part of the new trend in the NBA, where if you play fast enough on offense, it actually can help your defense by just wearing out the other team and exhausting them. You saw that in the Raptors win over the Cavaliers, where the Cavaliers looked absolutely gassed in the second half of that game. So you can make this work with LaRoche, but the problem is that it didn't fit the personnel at all with Memphis. Memphis is built around Ja Morant. He's their guy. If you want to know why he's their guy, go read Molly Morrison and her Substack, which you can find below on the Substack. I've got a link to it there. So he's their guy. They've consistently tried to repair relationships with Ja, tried to guide him in terms of getting rid of the worst influences in his life, the people around him that have caused a lot of problems, honestly, with cultural issues around the team. But they've still stuck by him, and they continue to stand by him. So they wanted to revamp the offense, which makes sense because LaRoche's system is a no-screen offense. The Heat are running the fewest pick and rolls in the league. They don't run pick and rolls. Ja's a pick and roll point guard. So here's a question. Why was Noah LaRoche then given control of the offense? And if the problems with the offense last season were because of that system, why was LaRoche maintained and held on while Jenkins was fired until the offseason when LaRoche was also let go and Asalo was given the reins? Because this is the core of all of this. People are split on exactly what the decision was. And it may have been that Taylor Jenkins had lost the locker room. And it may have been that they needed a new voice. And it may have been that they weren't going anywhere. But if the problem is how the team slid, a lot of it's connected to the change in offense, which led to their disconnection on defense. No one was happy. And that wasn't Jenkins' decision. Jenkins didn't hire LaRoche and Asalo. People around the league had said, yeah, Jenkins is mostly just a figurehead at this point. It's mostly Asalo and LaRoche that are running things. And yet Taylor Jenkins is the one that got fired, despite the team having won consistently under Taylor Jenkins. I'm relitigating this because it's important to understand the chain of events here. Because the other thing that people said was that as much as the decision to fire Jenkins and remove LaRoche as the head offensive coordinator and move to a Asalo's system was built around Ja, it was also built around Zach Edey, who wasn't getting enough time under Taylor Jenkins and wasn't being featured enough because you can't really use a plotting big man if you're not going to screen with him in the 2025 NBA unless he is an elite post-up playmaking big like Nikola Jokic or Alperen Şengün, which Zach Edey is not. So this rookie that the team reached up to draft wasn't getting enough feature time. And so they changed the offense. And now here we are. The results here this season are not only disastrous from a vibe standpoint, you could just watch this team and know they're disconnected, they're checked out, they're miserable. This team hates playing right now. And that's horrible. We'll get to Ja's role in that, but they should not be this bad. There is no explanation to go from where they were in 2023 to where they are in 2025 in November with still having Ja Morant, still having Jaren Jackson, still having Jalen Wells, who had a phenomenal season under Taylor Jenkins last year, having Cedric Coward giving them what they are, having Santi Aldama. There's no reason for this to be this bad. So is the half-court offense at least better? That was the big fix, right? Like, you need to fix the half-court offense. That was the problem with Taylor Jenkins. Yeah, the Memphis Grizzlies are 26th as I record this in half-court offense. Hasn't fixed anything. Now, the disconnect with Ja clearly comes from Isala's belief that you challenge players and then they respond well to that being called out, and they respond, and it makes everybody go closer together. My skepticism of this is not actually Isala's fault. That's a reasonable expectation, man. You should be able to have a meeting with people that you work with every day that you've shown love and care for and be like, hey, this is causing a problem. I try really hard to have an open door policy with everybody that I work with to let them know if there's something you think I can do better, I want to know. Like, you should be able to levy harsh criticism at a colleague if you have that trust, if you're not trying to vie for one another, if your job doesn't depend, if your job isn't bettered by them being pushed down. But this is the NBA. This is the NBA. David Blatt's not a bad coach. David Blatt was a great coach. But there's a basketball coach and there's an NBA coach, and they are not the same. I asked Frank Vogel one time, what is it that people do not realize about being an NBA head coach? And he said that it's very little to do with in-game decisions, and it is a million decisions off of the court. It's managing relationships. It's managing egos. It's navigating politics with a front office, ownership, and agents. It's keeping players both happy but in a competitive mind state. It's all of these things, as well as logistical decisions. And I got no proof that Salo has failed on any of those, but the relationship part has pretty evidently been a failure with Ja. There's no way to do this, to talk about this, without looking honestly at Ja. You can't scapegoat a Salo. It's on Ja to respond to that criticism, whether that's realistic or fair or standard for NBA players or not. Ja's been playing the victim card since the suspension over the guns. He has been. He doesn't feel, it's very evident from his comments that he doesn't feel like he did anything wrong. What I think of when I think of this, and I want to be very clear that I'm not suggesting that Ja Morant has a substance abuse problem, because I'm not saying that at all. I have no evidence of that. I'm not suggesting that, but this is a comparison. Ty Lawson picked up 4 DUIs over the course of 2 seasons. And after all of those, after he had lost what was going to be an all-star spot with the Denver Nuggets, after he had gone from being one of the highest paid point guards in the league and a guy that was on the rise to being a bit player who was out of the league, Ty still said, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem with alcohol. Now, it's very clear that that's behavior that we can understand, because that's the behavior of alcoholics. That's not uncommon. I, like a lot of people, have personal experience with people having that same kind of attitude. But it's really difficult to build forward if a guy can't accept his own mistakes. And this is the situation with Ja. If he doesn't think that the behavior of his friends is problematic, if he doesn't think that his behavior in terms of how he's led is causing the team harm, if he doesn't think that he's done anything wrong, you can't move him in a positive direction. It's going to have to take accountability. Even if some of those criticisms are unfounded and unfair, which I think it's pretty evident they have been under Asalo. You've set him up in a bad position and then are criticizing him for his struggles when your system isn't working either. And it does become a politics game. And there's a lot of money on the line. And all of these things have led to a toxic situation in Memphis. Again, I'm not saying that he has to abandon his friends. I'm saying that you can't have him, as everyone has commented that is around the team, that is close to the team, that understands the team, that they're as present as they are, that there's a level of a lack of accountability here. That doesn't mean you give up on Ja Morant. The same way you don't give up on Luka Doncic just because you're having trouble convincing him he needs to get in shape. You work with him until he matures. That's what you do. because you can't teach talent. As much as I want to focus on things like chemistry and making winning plays and all those types of things, you need talent to win in the NBA. And Ja Morant is still extremely talented. He's a better player than he has been. But the Grizzlies are going the wrong way, and they have been consistently. And they have been as a result of a series of decisions from the front office. A front office, mind you, that did absolutely awesome for about 5 years. From the start of the rebuild until 2024, everything was on track. And then things went sideways because there was an overextension. I'm a big believer in the NBA that you have to give coaches assistants that they trust. I don't think head coaches should be as paranoid as they are, because almost all of them are, that if a guy is hired by the front office, it's because the front office wants them to take their job. They're not always wrong. Michael Malone will tell you with absolute accuracy. But you still need to be able to make the right decisions. Like, you need to be able to choose your staff and have comfort and trust with your staff. And you need to be empowered to be the head coach, especially when you've won as many games and has much success as Taylor Jenkins did. Jenkins developed talent. Jenkins won games. Jenkins got better as a playoff coach. The failures against the Lakers were not his. That team ran its mouth too much and overextended itself and didn't play with the seriousness and discipline and got worked by a team that was on a hot streak with a lot of veteran talent. It's a bad matchup, too. Anthony Davis is a bad matchup for Jaren. Speaking of Jaren, this is my biggest problem with what the Memphis Grizzlies have done. 3 years ago, I would have tell you, look, Ja's been awesome. He's been everything, and Jaren's going to have to get it together, because right now he's a player that doesn't have a go-to move. He's got very little offense, and he fouls too much. 3 years later, Jaren Jackson Jr. is the best player on this team. He needs to rebound better. He needs to foul less. He needs to get a better whistle from the officials, who do not extend him the same courtesy as they do other defensive player of the years. They do not. The defensive players of the year. There we go. They do not extend him that same courtesy, and they need to, because a lot of these fouls are ridiculous. But Jaren's been awesome. He has had go-to moves. He's improved from three-point range. He's playing great basketball, and he's barely featured. And I have very little confidence that this is going to improve when Zach Edey gets back, because of the amount that the front office has put into Zach Edey and his presence. I'm well known as a Zach Edey doubter. I have no problem with Zach Edey and think he'd be great on a lot of teams. You put that kid on the Knicks, and they could probably trade Mitchell Robinson. You put him on the Kings, and they're in a lot better situation. The Grizzlies are an athletic, fast team. Why do you have a plodding, huge center? But if you've made that choice, that's fine. But you got to let him sink or swim on his own. You can't manipulate things to set him up to succeed when you have a contention window now with players like Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant. And maybe Ja's just washed. Maybe that's it. We've seen point guards do this. Meteoric rise, and then they fall off and vanish. And if you want to make that decision, fine. Call up Atlanta and see what Trae Young and his availability is. Call up the Kings and see what Zach LaVine's availability is. If you're in on Ja, be in on Ja. Resolve this situation. And maybe take some culpability for overextending into the coaching situation, because this has been a mess. The front office has drafted incredibly well. Cedric Howard's another hit, man. Cedric Howard's amazing. Every single draft, the Grizzlies get somebody who is good. Jalen Wells is better than he's playing right now. He just is. When they get Wells back on track, and Cedric Howard and Edey, who is a good player, this should be a team that can compete in the Western Conference. And the fact that it's not speaks to something greater, which has to get solved. There's been a domino effect of dumb decisions, starting with the decision to undermine Taylor Jenkins, a successful coach in this league that deserved better. There's no evidence that the players that matter were out on Taylor Jenkins. There's no evidence of that. You want to get things right, run a pick and roll system with Ja Morant, Zach Edey, involve Jaren Jackson a lot more. Run it with Jaren. Actually, run it with Ja and Jaren is what I would do. Who cares what I would do? It's probably your best path, though. It at least involves your two best players. Memphis isn't sunk. They're not doomed. And they're not a joke or a disgrace like some of these other organizations. what's most frustrating is that they are very close to being a good team. And they, for the last year and a half, have stood in the way of that. Play to your strengths. That's what the Memphis Grizzlies have got to do. For more on the NBA, check out Hardwood Paroxysm.